A racist and corrupt cop slammed a black boy against the lockers at school, right in front of his father, not because the boy did anything wrong, not because there was a threat, not because there was danger. He did it just to show his power, just to humiliate, just to remind everyone who was in charge. But what he didn't know, what no one in that hallway knew, was who that boy's father really was, and what he would do next would shock the entire city. It started on an ordinary Friday afternoon, during the final round of a local school basketball tournament. The gym was packed, families cheering, students shouting, cameras flashing. The boy had just made the winning shot. He wasn't just good, he was exceptional. And the spotlight was finally on him. People clapped. Teachers smiled. Even the principal came over to congratulate him. But in the corner of the gym, watching with narrowed eyes, was a man in uniform who didn't like what he saw. Not because the boy broke any rules, but because he broke a stereotype. Because he stood out. Because he was winning. And to that officer, that wasn't acceptable. When the game ended, students flooded the hallway to celebrate. The boy's father had just arrived, calm, quiet, observant. He was dressed in jeans and a hoodie, blending in like any other parent. No one knew what he had been. No one knew what he had done. They only knew he was proud. Proud of the young man his son was becoming. But just as he approached his son with a smile on his face, a loud voice cut through the hallway. "Hey!" the cop shouted. Everyone turned. "You think you're special? Take that cocky look off your face and hands out of your pockets." The boy looked confused. "I'm just heading to the locker room, sir." But the officer was already closing the distance. "I said, hands out now. You hiding something?" Before anyone could react, the officer grabbed him by the collar, slammed him against the lockers, and shouted for him to comply. Screams echoed. Phones came out. Teachers hesitated. And the father, he didn't move. Not yet. Not when the rage was flooding his chest. Not when his son's eyes were filled with fear and confusion. He just stood there, watching. "Is this what you do?" the father finally asked, his voice calm, too calm. The officer turned. "Mind your business. I'm doing my job." The father stepped forward slowly. "Your job is to throw kids against lockers for playing too well." The officer laughed. "You think you're tough because you're standing in a school full of kids and cameras. You picked the wrong day for that badge, officer." There was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The cop stared at the man, not knowing who he was dealing with. Not knowing that he was standing inches away from a legend. A man who had led operations in war zones, who had taken down terrorists in the dead of night, who had scars on his back and blood on his hands, but kept his past quiet for the sake of peace. A man who had given everything for a country that still allowed this. The boy stumbled back, trying to regain his balance, his eyes locked with his father's. And what he saw there wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. Precision. Like he was already playing the long game. What happened next didn't involve fists or weapons or loud threats. It involved silence. Strategy. And a slow, deliberate dismantling of a system that had protected men like that officer for far too long. Within hours, that father made calls. Not to friends. Not to reporters. But to people who owed him favors. Powerful people. Quiet people. People who had once served under him, and still answered when he called. Names that didn't appear in the news, but shaped the very rules that governed the city. The father didn't scream. He didn't fight in the hallway. He simply set things in motion. By Monday morning, an internal affairs vehicle was parked outside the school. By Wednesday, the officer's name was on a suspension list. And by Friday, the entire community would learn what the officer had been hiding for years, complaints swept under the rug, excessive force cases that mysteriously disappeared, connections to a local sheriff with ties to white supremacist groups. All of it, exposed. One layer at a time. But that was just the beginning. The real storm came when the boy's father stood up, not as a parent, but as a soldier. As a man with nothing left to prove, and everything to protect. When he finally spoke out in a public forum, cameras rolling, hearts pounding, he didn't ask for revenge. He asked for reckoning. And he got it. Not just for his son, but for every kid that officer ever laid hands on. For every student that felt small in their own school. For every parent who cried alone after injustice knocked on their door and no one answered. Because the officer didn't just pick the wrong kid. He picked the wrong father. And now, the world was about to find out what happens when the oppressed have power, and know how to use it. But the question remains, what exactly did that father do behind closed doors that turned the entire city upside down? What did he unleash that made even other officers start turning against one of their own? What secret did he use to dismantle everything that protected that badge? And when justice finally came knocking, was it mercy, or something much colder? Stay with us, because what happens next will flip everything you thought you knew about power, race, and revenge. This isn't just a story. It's a reckoning. Before we begin, a message from Plow of Twist. To every black viewer watching this, we see you, we stand with you, and we will never tolerate racism in any form. At Plow of Twist, we believe in justice, dignity, and the power of truth. This story reflects the real pain many have endured, but also the strength, courage, and triumph that follows. Enjoy the story, and if it moves you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more narratives that matter. Oakland, California had always been a city of contradictions. A place where opportunity brushed shoulders with oppression, where million-dollar tech deals happened a few blocks from food banks, and where voices demanding justice echoed against institutional silence. The air carried both resilience and resignation, depending on where you stood. And for Malik Johnson, a 42-year-old single father and former U.S. Special Forces operative, Oakland was no longer a battlefield of foreign enemies, it was a battlefield of subtle violence, invisible lines, and deeply rooted injustice. After 2 decades of service across the globe, Malik had returned home not for glory or medals, but for the one thing that meant more than life itself, his son, Jalen. Malik was a man who moved with quiet intensity. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. He wasn't flashy, didn't dress to impress. Most who saw him at Jalen's games or around the neighborhood had no idea about his past. They saw the beard, the calloused hands, the worn Oakland Raiders cap he always wore, and they assumed he was just another hard-working black father doing his best to raise a son in a city that didn't always make it easy. But what they didn't see was the shadow behind his eyes, the memories stitched into every muscle, the calculated way he surveyed every room he walked into. Years of combat had rewired him. He no longer believed in heroes or saviors. He believed in preparation, protection, and silence. Jalen, on the other hand, was 17, bright, charming, and magnetic in a way his father never was. He had his mother's soft features and Malik's intensity when he locked eyes with someone. A shooting guard on the school's varsity basketball team, Jalen wasn't just talented, he was strategic. He read plays like war maps, moved on the court like he was born there, and understood that for someone who looked like him, excellence wasn't just admired, it was scrutinized. He was popular, but not cocky. Respected, but not untouchable. That was the unwritten rule, a black boy in a white majority school could rise, but only so far. The moment he soared too high, the ceiling reminded him it was still there. Skyline High School was nestled in the Oakland Hills, surrounded by trees and far enough from the heart of the city that it could pretend the problems below didn't reach its gates. The school prided itself on diversity and academic excellence, with glossy brochures showing smiling students of every background. But beneath the surface, the old system still lingered. Disciplinary actions skewed sharply along racial lines. Black and brown students were watched more closely, punished more harshly, and spoken to with less patience. Malik had seen the signs early on, subtle shifts in tone from teachers, coded language during parent-teacher meetings, assumptions about Jalen's attitude whenever he stood up for himself. Then there was Officer Briggs. Paul Briggs had been assigned as the school's resource officer 2 years ago. White, mid-40s, buzz cut, and a permanent scowl, Briggs was the type of man who never stopped being a cop even when he wasn't on duty. He carried his authority like a weapon, flashing it in hallways, interrupting lunch periods to check in, standing too close when he questioned students, and always making sure his presence was felt. The administration called it vigilance. The students called it harassment. And Malik, he called it dangerous. Briggs had clashed with Jalen once before. A minor incident, Jalen had stepped in to stop a younger kid from being bullied. Briggs arrived late, misunderstood what had happened, and accused Jalen of escalating things. There were no serious consequences, but the tension had been set. Briggs didn't like being corrected, especially not by a black teenager who stood tall, looked him in the eye, and didn't stutter. From that moment, Jalen was on his radar. Malik had tried to play it calm. He knew the rules of engagement in civilian life were different. No intel, no assumptions. So he watched. He listened. He kept his son close. Every evening was a debrief: how was school, who said what changed. Jalen never complained, but Malik could read between the lines. The weight was building, and he could see it in the way Jalen's jaw tensed when he talked about certain teachers, how he stayed later after practice to avoid walking out alone, how he laughed less on school nights. And that worried him more than anything else. Then came the championship. The city's inter-school basketball tournament was a big deal. Skyline had been the underdog all season, but Jalen had pushed them through the ranks with grace and fire. The final game was intense, and when the buzzer rang with Jalen's three-pointer sealing the victory, the crowd erupted. Malik had been running late, stuck in traffic, but he arrived just in time to see the celebration. It should have been a proud moment. One of those golden memories that fathers cherish forever. But what happened next rewrote everything. As the team filtered into the hallway outside the gym, dripping with sweat and adrenaline, Briggs was already waiting. No one knew why he was there. Maybe he had been watching the game. Maybe he had been told to keep an eye on the crowd. Or maybe he just wanted to remind Jalen that joy had limits. Jalen was walking toward the locker room, headphones in, smiling as teammates clapped him on the back. Briggs called out to him. Jalen didn't hear. Or maybe he did, but pretended not to. Either way, Briggs didn't like it. Without warning, he closed the distance, reached out, and grabbed Jalen by the collar. The boy's back hit the metal lockers with a metallic thud that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Students froze. Coaches yelled. Someone screamed. Phones came out. Malik turned the corner just in time to see his son's body pinned, confusion and fear in his eyes. His breath caught in his chest, not from shock, but from control. Years of training had taught him not to react emotionally. But this was not a battlefield. This was his child. Briggs barked about non-compliance, about suspicious behavior, about respect. Jalen kept his voice low, saying again and again that he didn't do anything. That he was just walking. That he didn't even understand what was happening. But Briggs wasn't listening. He wasn't even hearing. This wasn't about danger. It was about dominance. About punishment. About making an example of a boy who dared to win in a system designed for him to fail. Malik stepped forward. Not fast. Not loud. But with a presence that shifted the entire air in the hallway. Briggs turned and said something snide, something about how people need to teach their sons manners. Malik didn't answer. He looked at Jalen. Checked his eyes. His breathing. Then he looked at Briggs. Not with fear. Not with anger. With study. Like a man filing away a name, a time, a target. The incident made its way through the school like wildfire. Videos spread. Hashtags formed. The administration scrambled to release statements, urging calm and investigation. Some teachers voiced support. Others remained silent. But Malik didn't post. He didn't yell. He didn't march, at least not in public. Because Malik Johnson wasn't a man who fought battles out loud. He was a man who dismantled systems from within. Who understood that real power wasn't in what you shouted, it was in what you built in silence, in the shadows, until it was too late for anyone to stop it. And now, the wheels had started turning. What Briggs didn't know was that Malik hadn't spent the last few years just being a father. He had been documenting. Researching. Watching. That confrontation was the match, but the fire had been ready to burn for a long time. Malik didn't want revenge. He wanted reckoning. Not just for his son, but for every child like him. And what he was about to do would leave no corner untouched. But what exactly was Malik's plan? How could a man who kept to himself, who never flaunted power, suddenly move an entire institution? And what would happen when the system realized that the man they thought was just another father was, in fact, a strategist trained in the art of war? That's what you're about to find out. The days after the incident moved slowly, like wet cement hardening around every breath Malik took. Jalen wasn't the same. He went to school, he went to practice, he answered his father's questions at dinner, but his light had dimmed. The sparkle behind his eyes flickered now, cautious, burdened by the quiet shame of having been made vulnerable in front of his peers. Malik knew that feeling. The first time someone looked at you not as a human being, but as a threat. It never left you. It lodged itself somewhere deep in your chest, whispering doubts every time you walked into a room. Jalen had been cracked open, and Malik could feel the draft in the house now. They sat in the living room that Tuesday night, the TV flickering, muted. Jalen sat on the edge of the couch, spinning a basketball between his hands, slower than usual. Malik didn't look at him. He just asked, "Did you sleep last night?" Jalen shrugged. "A little." Then he said, "It's like I see it over and over again. Every time I close my eyes. Him, slamming me like that." Malik nodded slowly. "You know it wasn't about you, right?" Jalen looked up, angry. "How could it not be about me? He did it to me. In front of everyone." Malik turned to face him. "What I mean is, it wasn't about what you did. It was about what you represent. You were better than he expected. Louder than he liked. Smarter than he could stand." Jalen didn't answer. He just dropped the ball onto the carpet and stood up. None of that matters if people just believe him anyway. That night, Malik went into the garage, closed the door, and pulled out a locked case from the far wall. Inside were files, photos, data. Years of research. He hadn't planned on using it. He'd always hoped the world would do the right thing on its own. But that hope had evaporated in a hallway full of screams. Briggs wasn't an isolated bad apple. He was the rotting root of a tree that had poisoned too many lives already. And Malik wasn't interested in pruning branches anymore. Over the next week, Malik began making quiet moves. He met with Devin Wallace, a former Marine-turned-civil rights lawyer who owed Malik his life from an op gone wrong in Syria. Devin now worked in downtown Oakland, well-connected, surgical with words, and fearless in the courtroom. "I've been waiting for your call," Devin said as soon as Malik walked into his office. "You always said you'd only come to me if it got personal." Malik didn't waste time. "It's personal now." He laid out the file. Records of use of force complaints against Briggs dating back over a decade. Copies of emails from teachers who had witnessed racial profiling. Testimonies from students too scared to speak publicly. Devin leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. "You've been documenting this?" Malik nodded. "Every move. Every shadow. Every bruise. Devon flipped through the papers. This isn't a case. This is a demolition plan. Meanwhile, at the school, tension tightened like a noose. The students were restless. A few had staged a walkout, but were met with vague threats from the administration about disciplinary consequences. Briggs remained on duty, unapologetic, even smug. He carried himself like a man untouchable, surrounded by a system that had protected him for years. Jalen avoided him as best he could, but the hallways felt smaller now. Trapped. One day, Jalen came home with a cut on his arm from gym class. Malik didn't ask questions. He just looked at it and nodded. Every wound was a message. Every silence, a scream. At a school board meeting the following Thursday, parents gathered in a packed auditorium. Malik stood at the back, arms crossed, watching as one after another stood to voice their frustration. How can we trust the safety of our kids if the ones in charge of protecting them are the ones doing the harm, said one mother, her voice shaking. A man near the front raised his hand. I know Officer Briggs personally. He's not a racist. You people are just trying to cancel someone for doing his job. The room erupted. Malik didn't move. But Devon, seated beside him, whispered, "This is the fire you need. Let it burn." Malik didn't speak at that meeting. He didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, he walked outside, where a small group of students were gathered, holding signs with Jalen's name. One of the girls turned when she saw him. "Are you his dad?" she asked. Malik nodded. "Tell him we got his back," she said. "He's not alone." Malik's throat tightened. For a moment, he had to look away. He wasn't used to this kind of support. Not in a country that often made black fathers invisible unless they were being blamed. Back at the precinct, Briggs sat in a briefing room, watching the videos that had circulated. He sneered. "You'd think I shot the kid," he muttered. Another officer looked uneasy. "Maybe lay low for a while, Paul. People are on edge." Briggs scoffed. "I did my job. That punk didn't comply. End of story." But even as he spoke, he noticed the shift. The quiet hesitation in his colleagues' eyes. The way some of them avoided looking at him directly. The fortress wasn't as solid as it once was. Malik's next move came quietly but strategically. He contacted Maya Torres, a local journalist known for digging into corruption and blowing it wide open. She wasn't interested in surface stories. She wanted rot. Malik handed her everything. No attribution. No quotes. Just the truth, he said. She scanned the files, eyes widening. "You've been sitting on this?" Malik shrugged. "Waiting for the right time." She closed the folder and smiled. "Time's up." Over the following days, whispers began to circulate. First online, then on the news. Oakland school officer linked to pattern of racial abuse. Sources suggest Internal Affairs was warned years ago. Then came the leak, body cam footage from a previous altercation where Briggs had shoved a 14-year-old against a fence and falsified the report. The community exploded. Protests doubled in size. Jalen's name trended. The school board scrambled. And Malik? He watched. Silent. Steady. The wind was changing, and he had orchestrated the storm. Jalen started to feel it too. He came home from school one day and said, "They apologized to me today." The principal said she deeply regrets what happened. Malik raised an eyebrow. She regret doing it, or regret getting caught? Jalen laughed, for the first time in weeks. Both, probably. Then he grew quiet. "You're doing something, aren't you?" Malik paused. "I'm making sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Jalen nodded. "But what about Briggs?" Malik didn't answer. Just stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. That's coming. The pressure mounted. Briggs was placed on administrative leave. Internal Affairs opened a case. But Malik wasn't done. Because all of this, every headline, every protest, was just the surface. Beneath it, the deeper work had begun. Malik had uncovered connections. A city council member who had suppressed previous investigations. A police chief with political aspirations who had buried misconduct files. This wasn't about one cop. It was about the architecture of silence. And Malik was dismantling it brick by brick. But he hadn't yet made his final move. He was waiting. Watching. Calculating. Devon called him one evening. It's all falling apart. Briggs's lawyers are panicking. The mayor's office wants a meeting. Malik didn't respond right away. Then he said, not yet. Let it build. Because Malik knew the truth, the moment before collapse is the most fragile. When power is desperate, it makes mistakes. And that's when you strike. Now, something bigger was coming. Something no one, especially Briggs, was prepared for. Malik had set the pieces. Made the calls. Planted the seeds. And in just a few days, the world would find out exactly what a quiet man with a broken heart and a brilliant mind could do when pushed too far. The sun hit differently that morning. Oakland's sky had a hazy burn to it, casting long shadows across the downtown buildings like a slow warning. Malik stood across the street from City Hall, hands in the pockets of his coat, eyes following the subtle rhythm of people coming and going, unaware of what was about to unravel. Devon was already inside. Maya had her camera crew discreetly setting up. Jalen had stayed home. He wanted to come, but Malik insisted. Not today, he told his son. Today's for me. The city had been rumbling beneath its own silence for weeks. Petitions. Protests. Whispered threats and political damage control. Briggs had been suspended, then reinstated. The city claimed insufficient evidence, though the files and footage said otherwise. It was a calculated move, a test to see if the heat had cooled. But Malik hadn't stopped. He'd simply gone quieter. Deeper. And now it was time. Inside the chamber, it felt colder than usual. The mayor sat stiffly behind her polished desk. Council members to her left and right, flanked by lawyers with folders thick enough to intimidate the unprepared. But Malik didn't walk in as a victim. He walked in like a man who had studied every angle of the room. He didn't bring a speech. He didn't bring fury. He brought truth. And he brought receipts. Devon stood first, clearing his throat. We appreciate you agreeing to this closed hearing. I'll keep this brief. What we're about to show you is not just a case of misconduct. It's a pattern, documented over a decade, ignored by your offices, buried by your allies, and protected by silence. He gestured to Malik. This man gave his life to protect this country. And when he came home, the very institution he fought to defend became the threat he never expected. Today, he's not asking for justice. He's delivering it. The mayor tried to interrupt, but Malik raised a folder and placed it gently on the table. Before you speak, he said quietly, you should read that. Her eyes flickered, unsure. But curiosity won. She opened it. Inside were records, unredacted. Briggs's connections to a retired police captain who had once shielded officers accused of racial profiling. Email chains between school administrators and precinct commanders warning about community optics if too many incidents involving black students were reported. And finally, a signed statement from a former officer, Briggs's own partner, confirming that excessive force was routine and unquestioned. The mayor's voice was dry. Where did you get these? Malik met her eyes. You asked the wrong question. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a level that forced everyone to stop breathing. You should be asking why it took a soldier to do your job. Silence rippled across the room. One of the council members shifted uncomfortably. Another whispered to his aide. But Malik didn't stop. He opened a second folder. This is a sworn deposition from a former Skyline teacher who resigned after being pressured to downplay racial harassment. This is audio from a closed-door meeting where Briggs refers to black students as walking liabilities. This, he tapped a flash drive, is a recording of your chief of police telling a colleague to wait until the noise dies down. He paused. Well, I'm not quiet. And I'm not going away. The mayor looked pale now. One of the attorneys leaned in, whispering frantically. Malik stood back, arms crossed, as Devon slid a letter across the table. This is a civil suit, Devon said, but it won't stop there. We're going federal if we have to. You have a window to act. After that, you'll be answering on national television. They didn't have a response. They didn't have anything. Hours later, the story broke. Maya ran the exclusive with footage of the meeting, blurred faces, but crystal clear audio. The city exploded, again. But this time, the outrage had teeth. Within 24 hours, the police chief resigned. By the end of the week, the mayor held a press conference announcing an independent investigation, a complete review of the school policing program, and the termination of Officer Paul Briggs. But the real moment, came the following Monday morning. It was a school-wide assembly at Skyline. Students had returned from spring break, tension still thick in the air. The principal stood on stage, flanked by administrators and security. Jalen sat in the crowd, next to his best friend Darius, unsure of what to expect. Then the principal stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. As many of you know, she began, recent events have caused great pain and disruption in our community. Today, we want to start a different conversation, one led by someone who understands what it means to fight for justice, not just in the world, but right here at home. Jalen's eyes widened as Malik appeared at the side of the stage, walking slowly toward the podium. The room shifted. Whispers. Phones. Heads turning. Malik didn't look nervous. He didn't look angry. He looked ready. He stood in front of the microphone and took a deep breath. I wasn't supposed to be here today, he said, voice low but firm. Not like this. But sometimes, when the system won't protect your children, you have to remind it who it's supposed to serve. He paused, scanning the students. My son didn't ask for a fight. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't swing a fist. He simply existed, and for some people, that's all it takes. That's enough to be seen as dangerous. Disrespectful. Disposable. There was a stillness in the room now. Even the teachers leaned forward. But what they didn't know, he continued, is that I've fought in places where enemies wore no uniforms. I've stood in villages torn by war, trying to protect people who didn't look like me, didn't speak my language, but trusted me to defend their lives. And when I came home, I thought I'd finally be safe. I thought he would be safe. He looked at Jalen. I was wrong. But now, things are going to change. Not because we begged. Not because we cried. But because we stood. He stepped back. The applause began slowly, then surged like a wave. Jalen stood. And in that moment, surrounded by his peers, their hands clapping, his heart pounding, he felt something lift off his chest. Not just vindication, but power. Across town, Briggs sat alone in his apartment, TV on but volume low, watching it all unfold. His phone had stopped ringing. His badge had been turned in. The union had backed away. And for the first time in years, there was no one left to protect him. Then his door buzzed. He looked at the monitor. A courier. He opened it. The man handed him an envelope, nodded, and left. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. No signature. It read, "You picked the wrong war." And beneath that, taped to the bottom, was a photo, Malik in uniform, flanked by two generals, a medal shining on his chest. Briggs sat down. For the first time, he realized, he had never been the strong one. And now, he was alone. The wind had shifted. That same afternoon, as students dispersed after the assembly, the energy on campus was different. A subtle current moved through the hallways, not the tension of fear, but the charge of awakening. Jalen walked out of the auditorium with his head higher than it had been in weeks. He could feel the stares, but they weren't laced with pity anymore. There was something else there now, respect, maybe, or quiet admiration. People stepped aside. A few nodded. Darius leaned in and whispered, "You feel that? They finally see you, man." Jalen gave a crooked smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, but for how long?" Malik stood just outside the building, waiting for his son. His arms were crossed, but his posture wasn't tense, it was protective, grounded. Jalen stepped out and met his father's gaze. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds, letting the moment breathe. Finally, Jalen asked, "You good?" Malik gave a slow nod. "I did what I had to do." Jalen looked down at his shoes, then back up. "I didn't know you could talk like that. The way you stood up there, they listened. Every word." Malik looked away for a moment, then replied, "Sometimes silence does more damage." But today, they needed to hear it. Jalen didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I'm glad they did. But I'm still angry." Malik's jaw tightened slightly, and he took a deep breath. "You're supposed to be," he said, voice calm but firm. "Anger isn't the problem. It's what you do with it that matters." Jalen nodded slowly, then stepped closer. "What did you send him?" Malik's eyes didn't flinch. "A message." Jalen waited for more, but his father didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. Meanwhile, in a quiet precinct office across town, the aftershocks of Malik's move were being felt. Briggs sat with his lawyer, a tired man with a graying beard and a half-drained coffee cup on the table between them. The room was dim, walls yellowed with time and resignation. The lawyer flipped through a folder of documents, shaking his head. "They have you boxed in," he muttered. "Too many reports, too much corroboration. They're going to offer you a deal, but it's not going to be pretty." Briggs's voice cracked slightly as he leaned forward. "You're supposed to protect me. I did everything by the book." The lawyer gave a dry laugh. "That book hasn't protected anyone in a long time, Paul. You were sloppy, arrogant. And you went after the wrong damn kid." Briggs slammed a fist on the table. "He disrespected me. He ignored me." The lawyer looked at him flatly. "You assaulted him. And his father just dismantled your career using nothing but facts and your own damn words. You think you're a victim here? Wake up." Briggs fell back in his chair, breathing hard. He wasn't used to this, being powerless. Every system he had leaned on was crumbling. No one returned his calls. His union rep had gone silent. Even the officers he used to joke with in the break room avoided eye contact now. His name was radioactive. The worst part wasn't the suspension, the lawsuits, or even the looming possibility of criminal charges. The worst part was that the world no longer feared him. And in his mind, that was all he ever had. Back at home, Malik sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old photo he had sent Briggs. The one from his last deployment. Not because he needed Briggs to remember who he was, but because he needed him to understand what kind of man he had tried to humiliate. Malik hadn't fought for medals or headlines. He had fought for clarity. For discipline. And when a man like Briggs disrespected his son, he didn't respond with noise. He responded with precision. That was the difference. Later that night, Jalen came into the kitchen, holding a letter. "This came for you," he said, handing it over. Malik opened it slowly, eyes scanning the contents. It was from the city's education board, an official apology, not just for the incident with Briggs, but for the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. They were disbanding the school resource officer program entirely, launching an equity reform initiative, and asking Malik to sit on a new advisory board. Jalen watched his father's face. "Are you going to do it?" Malik folded the letter carefully. "I didn't do this to sit on a board." Jalen tilted his head. "Then why'd you do it?" Malik looked at him. "So you could walk down a hallway without wondering if you're next." Jalen sat down across from him. "Do you think it's really going to change?" Malik didn't answer at first. He leaned back, eyes distant. "Change doesn't come in a wave. It comes in pieces. But every piece matters." Jalen nodded, absorbing the weight of it. "I want to help. Not just play ball. I want to speak up too." Malik's expression shifted, somewhere between pride and pain. "Then speak with purpose," he said. "Don't just raise your voice. Make sure they remember what you said." Across the city, a knock echoed on a worn apartment door. Briggs opened it slowly, expecting another subpoena, another reporter, maybe even protesters. But it was just a man in a hoodie, face shadowed, holding a flash drive. "From him," the man said. Briggs took it, confused, as the man turned and walked away without another word. Inside, he plugged it into his old laptop. A video loaded, grainy security footage. It was him. Slamming Jalen into the lockers. Audio synced. His voice, his words. And then, cut to a montage of other footage. Other incidents. Other boys. Other voices. All of it. It wasn't just a video. It was a mirror. The final frame froze on Malik's face, standing at the podium in the school assembly. A single line appeared across the screen: "You taught fear. I taught accountability." Briggs closed the laptop and sat in silence. Meanwhile, Malik and Jalen sat on the back porch, the city lights flickering below. Jalen asked quietly, "Do you think he regrets it?" Malik didn't look at him. "Doesn't matter if he does. What matters is that he'll never do it again." Jalen leaned against the railing, feeling the wind on his face. "You think I'll ever stop being angry?" Malik looked at him then. "Maybe. Maybe not. But you'll know what to do with it." They sat like that for a long time. No more words needed. In that stillness, a different kind of strength was born. Not in the fists. Not in the rage. But in the quiet decision to fight smarter. To break the cycle. To build something that would last beyond this moment. Malik didn't need revenge. He had something better. Control. Truth. And the knowledge that even the most powerful can fall when the right man decides to stand. Weeks passed, and the noise slowly began to settle, but the dust hadn't fully cleared, because change, real change, never came in silence. Oakland wasn't just reacting anymore, it was watching. Schools were rewriting protocols, meetings were being called late into the night, city officials walking with caution, choosing words more carefully than they ever had before. People weren't just concerned with the brutality itself, but the fact that someone, a quiet man with no title and no platform, had exposed what institutions tried to bury. Malik had never wanted attention, but his name carried weight now, even among those who once wouldn't have bothered to learn it. And with that weight came something heavier than recognition: responsibility. Jalen's world had shifted, too. He walked through the halls with a kind of calm tension, a presence that made people pause. Not out of fear, but respect mixed with a strange discomfort, as if he had become a mirror too clear for people to avoid. Teachers spoke to him differently, some with forced warmth, others with quiet shame. Students who had never said a word before now offered nods, fist bumps, even apologies. He didn't know what to do with any of it. The anger hadn't left him, not entirely, but it had evolved into something sharper, an awareness of how fast things could be taken, how easily the rules bent against someone like him. Basketball practices resumed, and the rhythm of normal life tried to return, but something underneath had changed. He couldn't run up and down the court without hearing echoes in his mind, of slamming metal, of silence, of his father's steady voice holding the world together. Malik stayed quiet publicly, but privately, he was working harder than ever. Invitations flooded in, community forums, school board meetings, podcasts, news interviews. He turned down almost all of them. He didn't want to become a symbol. He wanted to remain real, grounded in the purpose that had started all of this. But he did accept one invitation, to sit with a room full of Oakland educators for a roundtable on school safety and reform. The room was full of uncomfortable faces, people afraid to speak honestly, afraid of being accused, or worse, exposed. Malik didn't raise his voice once. He sat, listened, and then finally spoke when it grew too quiet. He didn't blame anyone directly. He didn't need to. All he said was that the silence around the harm was worse than the harm itself. That too many people had chosen convenience over courage. That fear could no longer be used as an excuse to avoid accountability. A young teacher approached him after the meeting. She was nervous, wringing her hands. "I wanted to say something," she said, during all of it. "I wanted to stand up for Jalen, but I froze." Malik looked at her carefully. "Then don't freeze next time," he said. "Someone always has to go first. The rest follow." She nodded, eyes damp, ashamed but thankful. "Thank you," she whispered. Malik didn't reply. He just walked away. At home, things were different between him and Jalen. Not colder, but more complex. The incident had cracked open something between them. Not a fracture, but an opening. Jalen started asking harder questions. Not just about the world, but about his father. "How come you never told me about the stuff you did? Like, when you were in the army?" Malik exhaled slowly, leaned back in his chair. "Because it wasn't about the stories. It was about what I had to become to survive them. That's not something I wanted you to carry." Jalen nodded, absorbing the weight of that truth. "But I do carry it now," he said. "Whether I wanted to or not." Malik looked at him, eyes steady. "Then carry it with purpose." The tension in the city wasn't gone. There were still flare-ups, still protests, still debates raging on news segments and community blogs. Some people called Malik a hero. Others accused him of being a disruptor, someone who inflamed tension. A few even went further, whispers about how dangerous it was for one man to hold so much power, how quickly public opinion could turn a soldier into a symbol and then into a threat. Devin warned him, gently. "They're trying to flip the narrative. It's classic. Give it time and you'll be the problem instead of the solution." Malik wasn't surprised. He had seen it happen too many times before, heroes praised one week, vilified the next. The only way to survive was to stay rooted in the truth. Not their truth. His. One morning, a package arrived at their doorstep. Inside was a folded newspaper from a small town in Georgia. The headline read, "Former officer found dead in apparent suicide." It was Briggs's cousin. A man Malik had never heard of, but who had once worked in the same county as Briggs. Malik stared at the article, then slowly closed the paper. The rot was deeper than anyone realized. Jalen saw the paper on the table and asked, "Did you know him?" Malik shook his head. "No. But the sickness spreads when it's ignored. People don't want to believe it lives in their towns. In their families. But it does." Jalen swallowed hard. "Do you ever regret doing all this?" Malik's answer was quiet. "Only that it took this long." And yet, amidst the aftermath, a new challenge was forming, one Malik hadn't prepared for. A group of parents had begun organizing around him. They wanted him to lead a new initiative, a formal movement for police accountability in schools, possibly even run for a position on the city council. Malik refused. Again and again. "I'm not a politician," he said. "I don't want to become part of a machine I fought to expose." But the pressure kept coming. Leaders saw influence. Communities saw leadership. Even Maya reached out, asking if she could do a follow-up story, something more personal, something that showed the man behind the headlines. Malik declined. "I didn't do this to be seen," he told her. "I did it so my son could disappear into a crowd without becoming a target." But there was one invitation he didn't refuse. A group of students at Skyline had organized a panel, a student-led event on racial justice and systems of power. Jalen helped plan it. And when he introduced his father, his voice trembled for the first time. "This is my dad," he said, pausing, "but you already knew that. What you don't know is that before all of this, he never talked about what he'd done. Now I know why. Because he was waiting for something worth speaking for." Malik stepped up to the mic, looked out over the sea of young faces, and said nothing at first. Just let the silence fill the room. Then he leaned into the mic. "Every system is made of people. And every person has a choice. You can choose to protect the silence. Or you can choose to break it. But once you see it, once you feel the weight of injustice, you can't go back to pretending it's not there. Not if you want to live with yourself." I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to lead. But the moment someone put their hands on my son, that choice was taken from me. So I did what I had to do. Not because I'm brave. But because no one else would. The applause was quiet at first. Then it built. No cheering. Just slow, firm claps. A rhythm of recognition. A sound that said, "We understand." Later that night, Malik and Jalen sat outside again, watching the stars flicker. Jalen said, "You're not the same as before." Malik looked over. "Neither are you." Jalen hesitated. "Is that a good thing?" Malik smiled faintly. "Depends on what we do next." That was the question now. Not how they survived it, but how they lived after it. The victory was real. But it came with scars. And scars always asked questions when the adrenaline faded. Because justice, Malik knew, wasn't the end of the road. It was only the beginning. And the next steps would define whether this was a moment, or a movement. The quiet that came after was unfamiliar. Not silence, but a kind of stillness that left room for reflection, for reckoning. Malik had always moved with purpose, each step calculated, each word deliberate, but now that the firestorm had passed, he found himself standing in a space he hadn't prepared for. The fight had been everything. The focus it required, the layers it demanded, the control he had to maintain, it had consumed every corner of his mind. But now, with the city shifting, the attention simmering, and the threat neutralized, the question lingered like fog: what now? Jalen was beginning to settle back into something resembling routine, though he carried more weight in his posture, more maturity in the way he spoke. There were no longer whispers when he entered a room. No more questioning glances. But in their place came new challenges, expectations, assumptions, people looking to him not just as a student, not just as an athlete, but as a voice. He didn't know how to be a voice. He didn't ask for it. But it followed him everywhere now, like an echo he couldn't control. And Malik, seeing this transformation in his son, wrestled with the guilt of what it had taken to spark it. One evening, Jalen came home later than usual, dropping his bag by the door with a heavy thud. Malik looked up from the kitchen table, where he'd been reading an old journal, its pages worn and fragile. Jalen hesitated, then said, "They asked me to speak again. At some city youth event. Civil leadership thing." Malik set the journal down. "Do you want to?" Jalen shrugged. "I don't know. Everyone keeps expecting me to have answers. Like I'm supposed to know what to say now just because of what happened." Malik studied him. You don't have to be anyone but yourself. You don't owe people your voice if it costs you your peace. Jalen leaned against the doorway, eyes tired. But what if staying quiet feels worse? Malik nodded slowly. Then speak. But not because they expect it. Do it because it means something to you. Jalen was quiet for a long moment, then finally said, I just wish I could go back to before. When all I had to worry about was practice and grades. Malik's jaw clenched slightly. There's no going back. Not for people like us. We don't get to unsee the truth once it's in front of us. Later that night, Malik found himself alone in the garage again. The air smelled of motor oil and old wood. Tools hung on the walls, untouched in months. He opened a cabinet in the far corner and pulled out a faded box. Inside were photographs, medals, dog tags, letters from men who hadn't come home. He held a picture of his unit, their faces young and exhausted, arms slung over each other's shoulders. He remembered every name. Every story. Every silence. And for the first time in a long while, he let his body feel the weight of those memories. Devin called the next morning. There's talk, he said bluntly. Some council members want to name you as part of a new oversight committee. Civilian control over school policing policy. It's more than symbolic. You'd have real power. Malik didn't answer right away. Devin continued, I know you're tired. I know this isn't what you wanted. But this is the moment when the system expects you to fade out. They'll give you applause so they don't have to give you influence. But if you walk away now, they'll fill that seat with someone who never saw what you saw. And all of this could happen again. Malik exhaled deeply, pacing the room. I'm not interested in meetings. I'm not built for bureaucracy. Devin replied, you're built for integrity. That's rarer than you think in this work. And besides, if not you, then who? That question lingered. If not me, then who? Malik had used those words once in a war zone, when a younger soldier hesitated during an ambush. He'd said it without thinking, but now it came back like a whisper from his past. Jalen had started writing in a journal. Something Malik had noticed quietly, never asking about it. But one day, Jalen left the notebook open on the kitchen counter while getting ready for school. Malik glanced at the page. It wasn't about the attack. It wasn't about Briggs. It was a letter, never meant to be sent. A letter to Malik. It read, you did all of this for me. But I know it cost you something. I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know how to say I see it. But I do. And I'm trying, every day, to be worth it. Malik closed the notebook and sat down, hands gripping the edge of the table. He had trained to endure pain, to survive isolation, to bury emotion deep enough that it wouldn't interfere with the mission. But this letter from his son, cut through all of that. It made the armor feel heavier, less useful. It reminded him that survival wasn't the same as healing. The next week, Malik attended the oversight meeting. He didn't speak at first. He watched, listened to the jargon, the dodging, the polished smiles from people who had never stepped foot inside a hallway where a child was slammed against metal. But when it was his turn, when the room finally looked to him, he stood, cleared his throat, and said simply, power without accountability becomes abuse. I've seen it overseas. I've seen it in uniforms. I've seen it in schools. If this board isn't built to make people uncomfortable, then it's just another layer of silence. And I won't sit in silence again. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. But no one spoke after him. Back at Skyline, Jalen found himself talking to younger students more often. Boys who looked like him. Girls who flinched when a teacher raised their voice. He didn't try to lead. He didn't try to teach. He just listened. And when they asked how he got through it, he didn't tell them about the lawsuit or the speeches. He told them about a night he sat in silence with his father, both of them too exhausted to speak, and somehow finding strength in that silence. He told them about fear, and how it never really left, but could be managed. He told them that surviving wasn't weakness. It was a kind of courage most people would never understand. One afternoon, after practice, Jalen found Malik sitting in the stands of the empty gym. He tossed him a bottle of water, then sat beside him. "I said no to the city youth event," he muttered. Malik didn't respond. Jalen continued, "I didn't want to go just because they expected me to. I want to choose when I speak." "Like you do." Malik nodded. "Good. Words are like bullets. You better be damn sure where you're aiming before you pull the trigger." Jalen smiled faintly. "You always talk like you're still on the battlefield." Malik turned to him, voice low. "Because I am." There was a long pause. Then Jalen asked, "When does it stop feeling like war?" Malik looked out at the court, the wooden floor glossy under the dim lights. "I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you just build peace where you can, in pieces. One room. One choice. One person." Jalen leaned back, letting that settle in his bones. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, they laughed. A soft, shared laugh, not about a joke, but about something else. Relief. Understanding. The strange, stubborn joy of surviving. The fight had left scars, no doubt. But it had also revealed something deeper, about who they were, and who they could become. It wasn't over. But something had shifted. And they were ready for what came next. There was something different in the air as spring began to slip quietly into summer. Oakland felt slower, not because the city had changed, but because Malik had. The rhythm of his days had shifted into something more deliberate, measured. The fire that had once fueled every step he took now burned in a different way, not as an explosion, but as a low, constant flame. He had fought his battle. He had stood up. But now came the part most people didn't think about, the part after the fire. The cleanup. The reflection. The choices that linger when the noise dies down and all that remains are the questions that never fully go away. He hadn't expected peace. He didn't even believe in it, not in the way most people used the word. But he did believe in presence. And that's what he gave his son every single day now, his full, unbroken presence. Jalen had grown quieter in recent weeks, but not out of fear or sadness. His quietness came with a focus. He had begun channeling his thoughts into movement, spending long hours at the gym, running drills, sometimes long after practice had ended. He still laughed with friends, still kept his headphones around his neck, still cracked jokes with Darius, but there was something deeper in the way he walked, the way he handled the ball, like each dribble carried weight that no one else could see. He was preparing, not just for games, but for a life that would never again feel small. One evening, Malik and Jalen sat in the truck outside the school after another late-night workout. The sky was dark, headlights cutting soft cones through the empty parking lot. Malik rested his hand on the steering wheel, the other holding a thermos of coffee he hadn't touched. Jalen broke the silence first. "They want me to write about what happened. For this scholarship essay. The prompt is something like, a moment that shaped your understanding of justice." Malik didn't respond at first. He stared ahead, then asked quietly, "What do you want to write?" Jalen hesitated. "I don't know. I mean, it changed everything. But I also don't want to be the kid who got thrown against lockers for the rest of my life. I don't want to be a headline." Malik nodded slowly, eyes still forward. "Then don't write about what they did to you. Write about who you became in spite of it." Jalen looked over. "But that still feels like giving them the story." Malik finally turned to him, his voice steady. "No. You're taking it back. When someone tries to define you with violence, and you answer with clarity, with purpose, that's not their story anymore. That's yours. Own it. Shape it. Speak it on your terms. Jalen leaned back, processing his father's words, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Later that week, Malik received a letter at the house. Official seal. City of Oakland. He opened it carefully, scanning the contents with the same precision he used in the field. It was a request, more formal this time, to lead a newly formed commission for community safety reform. Not just a seat at the table. The head of it. Real influence. Real power. Malik stared at the letter for a long time. He thought about every room he had walked into where he was underestimated. Every time he had chosen silence because noise wouldn't have been strategic. Every man he had trained. Every mistake he had learned from. He folded the letter neatly, placed it on the table, and walked outside. Jalen found him on the back porch, leaning against the railing, watching the wind move through the trees. "You gonna take it?" he asked. Malik didn't answer immediately. "I'm not a politician," he said again. Jalen stepped beside him. "Yeah. But maybe that's exactly why they need you." Malik looked at his son. "I spent half my life in systems I didn't create. Now they want me to build one." Jalen tilted his head. "Isn't that the point? So kids like me don't have to live through what we did." Malik exhaled, the weight in his chest shifting. "Maybe. Or maybe they just want someone to absorb the blame when it doesn't work." Jalen smiled. "You've never been afraid of blame." Malik laughed quietly for the first time in days. "That's the problem. I know how to take fire. I just don't know if I want to anymore." Jalen leaned in closer. "You told me once that courage isn't about wanting to fight. It's about showing up when it's necessary. So maybe this is one of those moments." Malik didn't respond, but he didn't have to. The decision had already begun to form. In the following weeks, things began to move more quickly than Malik expected. Meetings were scheduled, interviews requested, proposals drafted. He turned most of it down, preferring to move in small rooms, behind closed doors, where decisions weren't filtered through performance. He didn't want lights. He wanted impact. And yet, people watched. They studied him. Some respected him. Others feared what he represented, a man who couldn't be controlled by the usual systems, a man who had already walked through fire and wouldn't bow for applause. That kind of man made people nervous. Jalen, meanwhile, started mentoring younger players at Skyline. Coach hadn't even asked. Jalen had just done it. There was a freshman, quiet, wiry, full of nerves, who reminded him too much of himself when he first started. Jalen stayed after practice, helping him with footwork, showing him how to breathe under pressure. One day, after everyone had cleared out, the boy turned to him and said, "My brother saw you on the news. He said you're the reason he's not scared to walk home from school anymore." Jalen didn't know what to say. So he just nodded, patted the kid's shoulder, and kept shooting. Back home, Malik began keeping a journal. Something Jalen noticed but never asked about. Late at night, Malik would sit at the table, pen in hand, writing slow and methodical, as if each word had to be filtered through years of silence before it made it to the page. He wrote about war. About fatherhood. About fear. And eventually, about forgiveness, not for Briggs, not for the system, but for himself. For all the years he had chosen to stay quiet when he could have spoken. For all the times he believed that silence was strength, only to learn that it had nearly cost him everything he loved. One night, Malik and Devin met for dinner in a small restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Devin looked across the table, smirking. "You're famous now, you know. They're calling you the quiet general." Malik rolled his eyes. "They can call me whatever they want. I just want my son to graduate in peace." Devin leaned in, more serious now. "You changed things, Malik. Don't let anyone downplay that. You forced people to look at what they'd spent years avoiding. Malik took a sip of water, then said, I didn't want to lead. I just didn't want to bury my son. Devon nodded slowly. That's what makes you a leader. You didn't want it. You earned it. As they left the restaurant, Malik noticed a mural being painted across the street, faces of local heroes, people who had fought for justice in different ways. One panel remained unfinished, and for a brief second, Malik saw the artist glance over at him, then back at the wall. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The story was already being written in more places than one. And somewhere deep in Malik's chest, beneath all the scars and discipline, something softened, not hope, exactly, but the possibility of it. Not everything had healed. But something had begun. Summer arrived without asking permission. It didn't roar in, it drifted, subtle and steady, like the close of a long and painful book. Malik had taken a position on the Reform Commission, not because he wanted the title, but because he finally saw the value in placing himself at the core of change rather than on its margins. He didn't show up to take pictures or smile for cameras. He showed up with pages of data, hard truths, and solutions that didn't fit neatly into headlines. And while some around that table still resisted the discomfort he brought into the room, they couldn't ignore him. Not anymore. He became a bridge between people who had spent years pretending the other side didn't exist. The city didn't become perfect, but it became less blind. Malik made sure of that. Jalen's graduation day arrived beneath a clear sky, and the weight of everything he had carried now felt a little lighter. He walked across that stage not as a symbol of survival, but as a young man who had taken control of his narrative and rewritten it with his own hands. He delivered the closing speech that day, unexpected, brief, but unforgettable. He didn't recount the incident, didn't name the pain. Instead, he spoke about clarity. About waking up to the world as it really was, and still choosing to walk forward with purpose. He spoke about how strength sometimes sounded like silence and sometimes roared like truth. And how justice didn't always come with applause. Sometimes, it came quietly, when you looked at yourself in the mirror and knew you didn't flinch. When he stepped off the stage, he found his father in the crowd, not clapping, but standing with his hands folded in front of him and pride written all over his face in the way only a father can show it without needing to say it. Briggs, long removed from the badge he once abused, faded into anonymity. Legal pressure and internal review stripped away what little credibility he had left. He relocated, alone, to a distant state, out of the public eye and outside any system that would protect him. The man who once believed control came through intimidation now lived in the shadow of what he'd done, with no legacy to defend and no uniform to shield him. No one came to his defense anymore. The silence that followed him now wasn't power. It was consequence. And it was deafening. Devon, the man who stood beside Malik through every strategic strike, found himself reinvigorated. The fight had reminded him why he left the battlefield for the courtroom in the first place. His firm grew, and with Malik's guidance, he began offering pro bono legal counsel to students and families caught in the machinery of broken systems. He called it Operation Homefront, and Malik consulted every step of the way, not for credit, but because it was the right thing to do. They built something out of that fire. Something that would outlive both of them. Maya, the journalist who once followed Malik for a story, decided to stay in Oakland. She launched a new investigative project centered on systemic abuse in public education, but this time she worked with youth reporters, training them to tell their own stories. She said Malik had taught her that sometimes the best way to report truth wasn't to write it herself, but to hand over the pen. As for Malik, he kept writing in that journal. Page by page, he poured in the things he could never say out loud. The battles. The regrets. The love. The pride. He wrote not to be remembered, but to be understood, someday, by someone who might need to read about a man who didn't bend when it mattered most. He didn't retire from purpose. He simply evolved. He still sat in rooms that made people uncomfortable. He still called out silence when it cost lives. But now he did it with a different kind of fire, one that taught, not scorched. In his final entry that summer, he wrote something simple: I didn't set out to become anything. I just refused to disappear. Jalen left for college that fall. His goodbye wasn't dramatic. Just a long embrace on the front porch, no words exchanged, because everything had already been said. Malik didn't cry. He never did. But he stood outside for a long time after the car pulled away, his eyes locked on the horizon, heart full with the knowledge that his son would walk into any room, any court, any life, and never again wonder if his voice belonged there. And now, as you sit with this story, wherever you are, ask yourself, what would you do if someone you loved was silenced in front of you? Would you yell? Would you strike? Or would you, like Malik, study every piece, listen to every whisper, wait until the silence itself became your weapon? Because sometimes, justice doesn't wear a cape or carry a sword. Sometimes it walks quietly, stands still, and refuses to move until the ground itself shifts beneath it. This story isn't just about a father and a son. It's about power. The kind that lives in all of us. The kind that waits until you're tested to reveal itself. So the question I leave with you today is this: when your moment comes, will you be ready to stand still, speak loud, and never flinch? If this story moved you, if it made you feel, think, or even just pause, then don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Twist. More stories like this are waiting to find you. Stories that matter. Stories that linger. Stories that remind you of who you are, and who you could be. We'll see you in the next one.